We are now moving on to item B, which is the Pinkerton contract update. Dr. Littleton?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a report for the board that I hope is good news. I hope it becomes a rallying point for the board. I did have an opportunity to have an initial meeting with the headmaster of Pinkerton Academy in regard to a contract with the Hooksett School District. And what I'm going to report to you on are things that we agreed to conceptually. There is no agreement, there is no language. It's very early in the process, but here are the concepts that we believe can be worked into a contract that I think are of interest, or that will be of interest to the board and to the community at large. First of all, we talked about it being a 10-year contract. I think that's something that we talked about at the last meeting, that Manchester contract was 20 years, the minimum tuition contract is 10, and we would conceptually agree that it would be a 10-year contract. We conceptually agreed that the Board of Trustees as a group would meet with the school board at least 3 times a year, so that there's communication from the receiving school and the sending school district. We conceptually agreed that the Board of Trustees will designate 2 Hooksett residents who will serve on the Board of Trustees, so that we give this community representation on the Board of Trustees. We agreed conceptually that the school would provide us with report cards, attendance records, SAT scores, state test scores, advanced placement enrollments, and college placements for our youngsters petitioned out of the general Pinkerton population. That they would provide us with an itemized accounting, financial accounting, each year for the previous school year. We agreed conceptually that they will meet with the superintendent at least twice annually in regard to policy, curriculum, facilities, personnel, and services. The idea there is that before any action is taken by the school, we would have an opportunity to weigh in on what that action was. We agreed that the middle school principal would meet with the administration of the academy twice a year to make recommendations on curriculum programs and services. The biggest thing that we had to deal with was, who do you take and when do you take them? And so I'm going to lay this out for you. I think it opens all kinds of possibilities for this board to pursue. What we agreed to conceptually was our upperclassmen would stay where they are. No one would be compelled to move from where they are. And that in the fall of 2014, Pinkerton will accept all our freshmen, but Hooksett would be allowed to assign up to 75 students to another public high school. So, if I can, because we do have an audience, essentially what it would mean is if every 8th grader wanted to go to Pinkerton, they would guarantee us that they would take every 8th grader. But that the Hooksett School Board could assign up to 75 8th graders somewhere other than Pinkerton. If that's the direction we go in, I'm going to have to know real soon how you want me to proceed on how I identify and move forward on that other than Pinkerton option.
Ask a question about
Yep.
the,
I mean, yes.
you said 2014, and maybe you're getting into it, but is that in concurrent years also?
No,
Oh,
no. So
Sorry.
that would be the first year of our contract. In 2015, they would guarantee us that they will accept all our freshmen, but that Hooksett may assign up to 65 students to another public high school. With no explanation, it's up to this board, or it would be up to this board to say, yes, we've assigned 65 youngsters somewhere else other than Pinkerton. In 2016, they were guaranteed that they will accept all our freshmen, and Hooksett may assign up to 55 students to another public high school. And in 2017, they were guaranteed that they would accept all our freshmen, well, and in 2017 and thereafter, they would accept all our freshmen, and Hooksett could assign 45 students to another public high school for the duration of the 10-year contract. So what it does, I mean, I don't know about you, but like I want to do cartwheels because it incorporates everything that I've been listening to from board members and from parents for the last couple of months. It would guarantee that we do have some place that could take all our youngsters, no matter what happened. It would give you representation on that board. It would give us data on our students petitioned out so that we can make educational decisions K-8 based upon how well our kids are doing in high school, and would know how well our kids are doing in high school. But it leaves the door wide open for this board to set some sort of direction to send a fairly large percentage of our students somewhere else with no questions asked by Pinkerton. I think it's just like, and it's conceptual. One of the wonderful things about this is this was Mary Anderson and me. There's no lawyers, there's no attorneys, there's no complications. It's, here's what I believe the Hooksett school community has been asking for. How much of it can we deliver? And I seriously believe we're delivering everything that has been asked for. The board of directors would like to meet with the Hooksett board at Pinkerton on September 18th or 19th. It's a hi, I'm the Hooksett school board. Hi, I'm the board of directors. It's a personal touch. It's who are the players and what do they look like and so forth. And on that same evening, for those people who have not been able to see the campus, they would do a tour of the campus, and for those people who had seen the campus, we certainly wouldn't have to do the tour. And if all this makes sense to you, and again, I thought it was just great to be able to walk away from there with this type of concept in place, then I'd want your authorization to formally request a negotiator. And they would want that. They would want a letter saying that we wish to formally negotiate. But these are the more global things that conceptually we know we get into a contract.
Yes, sir.
So Dr. Wood, just to also clarify, like, so students that would go to a private school would not be included in that number. So if there was, let's just say 85 students that wanted to go, 10 of those went to private schools, that did not.
Right, a youngster can go to any private school that youngster wants to go to. It would be 75 in the first year, public school students.
And you would need approval to draw up that letter before the September 18th and 19th meeting, or?
Yeah, I would just draw up the letter, and it would be a couple of sentences. It would say, this will serve as formal notification that the Hooksett School District wishes to enter into negotiations with Pinkerton. And then, I guess a couple of things, and I don't want to push too hard on the board, but time will go by very quickly, and there's one wrinkle in this. Don't let me finish my conversation without the wrinkle. Time is slipping by very quickly, and if the board is interested in giving options to up to 75 kids for June of 2014, the board really has to decide whether those options will occur via policy or whether those options will occur via secondary agreements with other districts. I mean, we'll really, and I'm going to push you on that because the clock is really ticking, and I don't want to screw this up. We're in a great position right now. The wrinkle in all of this is Pinkerton is probably going to have to, they will be flexible for 2014. It will be flexible. But their budget process starts in the early fall. So we're going to have to let them know how many youngsters we're sending very early in the school year, which means we're going to have to start working with families when youngsters are 7th graders so that they can solidify a decision very, very early in the 8th grade year. So that'll be a change from what we've done in the past. But in order for us to reserve slots all over the place, it has to be an early decision.
Dr. Littlefield, has there been any talk of capital cost at all?
No.
Straight tuition, or have you not talked about that at all?
Straight tuition.
Any talk of the rate, or looking at what the current rate is? And
Yeah, the current rate is it's $10,250. Very close to that. It's a little over 250. It's changed. It might be 268 or whatever. That was the last year's. That's the upcoming year's tuition, I believe. And the wonderful thing that they do, and why I want the financial accounting in the contract, is once they do the financial accounting, we would only pay, we and other member districts, what the actual cost of running the academy was. So if they collect more revenue than they incur in cost, we get a rebate on the tuition. We get money back. And money's coming back to the member districts this year.
Yes, Mr. Lucas. I apologize, you're at a different time today, so I'm having a hard time seeing.
That's fine, don't worry about it. First of all, thank you, Dr. Littlefield, for that report, and it is exciting. And when you hit that first number, my heart skipped a beat because I said, this is beautiful. And what I'm hearing a lot from our community, though, is, you know, we've said it here at this board many times, we have 100 years built up with the city of Manchester. We have a lot of ties to these schools. We had a lot of people upset this year. My concern with that sliding number, though, is that we don't know right now to be honest, what the reaction of the Hooksett community is. We know Pinkerton's a good school. You have experience with it. We also know it's a distance, and that's going to create some hardship for people. As a board member, I don't feel comfortable yet that this community has wrapped its arms around Pinkerton as a decision. I've heard a lot in our community that our board is making this decision, but the people in the community aren't. Did you talk at all about keeping that first number static? In other words, 75 all the way down. Is there a reason that they would not want to do that?
The answer is no. We didn't talk about that. I think the conversation really was centered around the fact that our agreement would have minimal impact on them, and as their enrollments decline, we would be sending more youngsters there, which gives them some stability. From my point of view, to tell you the truth, when I put 75 out there as a concept, I thought it was going to get laughed off the table. But it works. It works for them, and I think it works for us. And I think originally we had, the board had, or up on an easel, the number 30 was out there. And I was trying to get like 50% more than that 30. Because I heard some people grumbling, like 30 is not a large number. So I tried to go back and forth with something I thought that would work for them. And quite honestly, I didn't want to have to sacrifice some of the other things, like, is any other school district going to give us 2 seats if we're sending half our kids, or actually less than half our kids? So it's the whole ball of wax that I was looking for. Very nice. So no, it was always sliding scale. How they would react to something else, I don't know.
David and John,
Not so much a question for you, Dr. Littlefield, but I understand how they need to know early. For this to work, as far as us assigning or allowing kids to be assigned to other schools, and the fact that this board has voted down multiple school agreements, it concerns me because the different schools without agreements have their own requirements for acceptance. And I think it's going to make an unlevel playing field if you want to go to Pembroke. Pembroke's not going to decide on you until February, but another school may, and we're going to report early, maybe December. So if that kid says no, hoping to go to Pembroke, and there's no guarantee because we have no contract with them, I think, and that's not on Pinkerton's side, that's on the board side here. And that concerns me just because of all the different, we saw this with some of the kids that went last year, the different requirements the schools have since they're not under contract. So, I think we should be pushed on that item again, frankly. Thank you.
Dr.
And,
Littlefield, going to answer the
permission to speak freely. I feel as though I'm back in the service. All kidding aside, maybe the board should discuss that very issue that Mr. Pearl just brought up. Do we want to close the door on, I don't know, what are we going to call them, mini agreements that that in fact Pinkerton becomes the anchor school. We're safe, we've got places for all our kids. But should the board, question mark, revisit whether we might want to look at mini agreements with other people, and then start talking about if you do, what that would look like, and then say to me, you know, if you go in that direction, Phil, go sit down with, and then tell me who it is. Or is the door closed on that? But maybe the board just wants to revisit it.
Can I just answer that? I'm all in favor of that, as you probably know. The other thing I would just point out to what you just said, Dr. Littlefield, with these numbers, even if these numbers went out to what Mr. Liskart wanted, with the number of schools that we're looking at, I think the mini agreements would be pretty easy because we wouldn't be taxing them. We wouldn't be able to send them an abundance of kids which would fill their budget. We'd probably be sending them a little bit of revenue that would enhance their budget. So even if we're up to the 75. So thank you for the extra time, Madam Chair.
Okay, John, it's your turn.
No, I heard what I wanted to hear.
Phil, you have a question?
I want to say I forgot what I had to say, but a few things actually, I guess. I guess I'm trying to keep in mind, again, with Dr. Littlefield, see with the numbers, again, just to set the public straight on TV and here. The state guidelines, 5% of kids going out of the districts. So we had talked at one time about, I think, the 10% number. We went up to 30 kids. And obviously we're in a transition period. If you look at, we talked about this at other meetings, the numbers of kids that went out of districts other than last year, and also kids that go to private school, which have ramped up in the last year or two as well because of things that were going on with Manchester. So I think those numbers would more than cover that aspect of it. Also, the fact that we have siblings this year obviously strewn all over the globe at different schools, which if you had a kid within, say, 4 years of that kid, obviously that's a no-brainer, so they can commute to that school. We have kids that have distance issues that live in areas of Hooksett that obviously would be tougher for them to get to Pinkerton that we're looking to take care of here. So, again, I don't think anything's going to be perfect, but at its face value right here, again, I think Dr. Littlefield was able to obtain many of the things that people were looking for, especially with the representation on the board. I also wanted to ask him, he had mentioned some items that Pinkerton would provide him, both on the financial side and as far as report cards, attendance records, etc. What do you receive currently from Manchester along those lines? Those items that you laid out, I didn't even catch all of them because you said them so quickly. But do you currently receive any of those items? And obviously those items will make it easier for you to make curriculum changes, etc. So
You currently do not, Hooksett currently does not receive that information. And to be honest with you, my experience with Pinkerton, because it's obvious that I have an experience with Pinkerton and one of the other SAU communities, is we do get those report cards on disc quarterly. Marge analyzes those so we know how our kids are doing, and we've picked up a couple of curriculum issues on our end. I don't mean Hooksett's end, I mean Auburn's end, that has resulted in some curriculum changes in Auburn to better prepare our kids for high school, and up until now we had no idea. So it's just wonderful data that we've been using.
Yes, but just so you know, when Dr. Littlefield speaks and you raise your hand, I write it down, so he has stated in the past that makes him nervous. So I do write it down. So when I'm nodding at you, I'm nodding at you to tell you I recognize that your hand's up. And David, I did see you were next. Yes, Phil.
I guess to Dr. Littlefield's point and David's point, with the, obviously, I mean, the other side of the coin is folks need to make budget decisions early in their year. So, I mean, obviously we have to take that into concern, and also staffing, et cetera, for the kids coming in. I guess the other side of that is, we are talking about like different schools other than the School of record, which we would be, may have different requirements for our kids to get in. So I think along the lines Dave was talking about before, if we put together some Hookstart criteria, I guess the downside of that is the fact if a district's not willing to meet those criteria, then our kids don't go there. So again, I'm open to looking at it, but I'm just saying there's obviously going to be two sides to that, where if kids are going one by one, they might be able to slide under the radar. And if we do it the other way, we may eliminate a choice. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Well, if, if we're considering this, and Dr. Littlefield has rightfully said that time is of the essence, this board clearly would have a huge decision to make. How those 75 and then declining numbers of students are allowed to be assigned to another school, if in fact there are 80 that want to. We don't know that. I think, to be fair, this board needs to lay out that plan ahead of time, because if we can't agree on that, or that becomes something that's really not supported by the public, it's going to be a waste of Dr. Littlefield's time to pursue this if it ends up being kind of a dead end, because we don't know how that we're going to let these kids go, or worse, that we end up fighting about it late in the year when we actually have kids that want to go places. So I think that's something that this board needs to address immediately, and maybe we should talk about it right now. We've talked about in the past with multi-contract that we would use first come, first serve, but based on the fact that my feeling at least, that the schools would have plenty of capacity, so we wouldn't really hit that high end. But we need to plan for it here because we don't know. And I think we need to come up with a plan to make this 75 doable if we're going to support the contract, or support the, not a contract, the negotiations.
So, Dr. Littlefield, I have a question for you. You were talking about, you mentioned that because of the numbers that we as a board can assign someplace else, that we may want to look at mini agreements with other school districts so that we can meet the criteria of when Pinkerton needs us to tell us, when Pinkerton needs us to tell how many 8th graders are coming. What would you, if we as a board wanted you to look at other schools that might be willing to live within the constraints that we may end up with in a Pinkerton contract, what would you need from us to be able to go and explore that? Because to this point, we have not looked at that.
Thank you. I think what I need is exactly what Mr. Pearl is suggesting. Roll up your sleeves and start talking about it right now. Forget about the rest of the agenda. No, forget it. We can't do that. There are things. But really focus on this discussion. I was hoping you would do that. That's why there's an easel there. And Anna White has come tonight, and maybe you can start having that discussion, and when you make some agreements, let's write them down, and as soon as you can give me concrete direction, I'll deliver on the next step as fast as I delivered on this step. Nothing's more important than this step.
Well, I think we could proceed without reconsideration on at least how we would handle the 75. And certainly, I don't mean to be the naysayer here, but this board has voted twice not to pursue multi-contract. So I think if we're going to talk about that, we need to have a vote of reconsideration to bring multi-contract back on the table. But I'd like to focus on the 75 because I think that becomes an issue whether or not we have any mini agreements or other agreements with JCB, because if we're going to go in there and represent that number, and particularly we have to do it to the public, we need to have a plan on how we are going to select those 75 kids. So I think that should be our first priority, and I am certainly willing to vote for reconsideration of multi-contract.
Dr. Littlefield, Can I ask a question? Dr. Littlefield, you have used the word a hybrid. So if we were with this Pinkerton, what was the word you used? Conceptually, what you have brought, that Pinkerton and you have discussed, do we need to reconsider a multi-contract, or could we be looking at a hybrid contract? Because this is more of a hybrid than a multi-school contract, because we actually have a place for all of our students to go. I'm just wanting to make sure that we make the right.
Sure, no, it's a fair question. And honestly, I don't want to get too hung up on semantics. I guess what I've suggested to you is multi-district contracts, where one of the districts, in this case Pinkerton, is what I'm calling the anchor school. And if we were going to draw it, at the center of all this would be Pinkerton as the anchor school, and there'd be 1, 2, 3, 6, whatever it is, other options for kids.
Well, I guess my definition between hybrid contract and multi would be if we tied these mini agreements to the passage of the Pinkerton contract, I would certainly think that's a hybrid Pinkerton contract, because that would mean that if the Pinkerton contract went down, we were somehow not going to have those others. I don't know that we can do that. So I do think it's multiple contracts, and certainly they would be more mini in the sense that we don't have representation and a lot of the other things that are here at the main school. But I still think it is, in all fairness, there would be multiple contracts signed. So therefore, it does need to be multiple contract. But getting back to my point about these 75, which, may not be an issue, but I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is first come, first serve. And when I've said that in the past, some people have looked at me like I had two heads. How could you do that? But I don't know how else would we come up to that 75 number. So I would throw on the table by default that it would have to be first come, first served when people are saying that they want to go to another school, and we're going to have to set up what that requirement is. I don't know if it's the same as JCB, meaning that they're accepted, in that, but I'm looking for something other than first come, first served. I don't think we're going to want to do it academically. I mean, that would probably be a nightmare.
Yes, Mr. Dunlop.
Okay, so, and again, I wasn't on the board when this occurred, but when all the discussion was going on with JCB and all the different iterations that jumped through, et cetera, what was and again, this wouldn't be the only, I'm just searching for things maybe that have already been created that we could mimic in some way or form. Was there like specific guidelines or specific process to allow kids out of district when it tightened up for a while there? And then it went back really liberal? No.
Well, no, the tightening up was really right to the state standards that you mentioned before. Well, actually been more stringent, manifest education hardship. But when it was, as we've been assigning lately, it's based on acceptance of the school, which can vary, on what they have to do, and tuition payment and transportation. I would hope that we could have a multi-school contract that could get rid of tuition payment and variable acceptances. I don't know that we're going to get rid of transportation, but those would be two that I would want to. But my main concern is, how do we determine who those 75 kids are? Because I think that's what, if we're going to put this to the voters, we've got to explain to them, here's the process that we're going to make the 75. So when you're voting on this, you understand what you're voting yes or no on. So I just think that, I threw one idea out here, which is basically first come, first serve. Somebody says that they want to go to a certain school, but then how do we make that official? Is it by acceptance? Or are they just writing a letter of intention to say that they want to go to that school? And are we going to have a rush? These are things that I think we need to think about.
Yeah, David, I think, oh, I'm sorry. To your point, so again, if we look at the numbers and upfront and obviously, like Dr. Littlefield said there, the number will go down as time moves on. Again, right, this year as an example, even with the 25 kids that go to private school, 20 to 25 kids, we're talking like this is 60% of the kids, just ballpark, that will be able to go elsewhere. So I don't think we'll approach that number. And again, because the biggest things I've heard, and which I understand the travel issue for everybody. I haven't heard anybody say that the education at Pinkerton is substandard. And at the end of the day, again, the situation we had this year where it was abnormally high, where everybody opted out of Manchester because they didn't know what the heck was going on, I think that will come back into a reasonable state. So I understand we have to put some criteria around it. I just don't see us bumping up against that number. But again, I'm of a different thought process. But.
Well, Mr. Dumbo, I can't say I disagree with you, but I think we need to be ready to hit that number, and we've got to come up with what the rules are going to be. So, yeah, hopefully everybody will get the choice they want and that works out. But to be fair, if we're going to ask people to approve this as a plan, they need to know worst case scenario, you know, how somebody doesn't get what they want. So I'm throwing out there first come, first serve, and then make some criteria about what an actual declaration means. You know, if you say your kid's going somewhere else, is that acceptance at a school or something else? But I can't think of anything other than the basic concept of first come, first serve. I don't know how else we could, unless we do a lottery, be very complicated.
Dr. Littlefield, I have a question for you. Pinkerton has expressed that they would be very flexible with our students entering in September of 2014. But for our students entering in September of 2015, they're going to want to know in September or October of 2014. Is that correct? Like if you're coming, so in our communication plan and how we communicate this to our students, we're really going to need to be communicating it to both our 8th grade and our 7th grade parents simultaneously of what our process is. And I'm sorry if I'm thinking backwards, but I'm trying to.
First time through,
We're going to need.
yes.
And then the subsequent year, which would be in September of 2015, we already have 2 grades at Pinkerton. Our 7th graders who are currently in 6th grade now, they're gonna need to be communicated with, and they're the students who have 55 who can go somewhere else.
They will have to be communicated
In September of 15 to enter in September of 2016.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to try to wrap my mind around the little
And
pieces too.
if I could, and then just also ask the board to clarify something. Up until now, our kids have been given, and I don't mean this negatively, leftover slots in other school districts. In the future, if we have multi-district agreements, they're entitled to those slots. So my sense is everyone that we come up with an agreement with is going to say to us, by October 1st, you've got to give me the number. Because you know what our own budget process is, especially in these SP2 communities. They're all going to have to know what their enrollments are. The second thing that I'd ask you to consider, just so we're precise in the terms we're using, are we in a multi-district plan talking about other districts accepting our kids? Or are we talking about our ability to place our kids? Because, you know, Hooksett is full of great students, but if my kids, I remember back in their high school years, probably nobody would want them. And I would want to make sure that they were properly placed. And that was Hooksett School Board making that decision. So I'm just throwing that out there so that clear.
Just to get back to the 75, Dr. Littlefield, have you got anything, suggestions, if, you know, how this board might move here if we have 80 kids? You know, that's what concerns me. Best case scenarios I always look forward to, but we have to be ready for worst case, and that's what I'm trying to get some input.
And we're all talking about this reluctantly. I have a sense that Mr. Dembo is probably on target, that we won't hit that number. But if we do, because the question will be asked, the fairest way, although not the flawless way, might be lottery.
So if you wanted to go, just.
So 80 kids apply and we have 75 slots, even though I don't think that's going to happen.
Even with first come, first served, yeah, you might have at midnight people camping out, or, you know, it could be that problem.
Cheryl?
As everybody's been discussing, the thing that kept coming back to me was, I just felt like, how do we really make any decisions about the 75 other than, is it going to be lottery or first come, first serve? I feel like we really kind of need to know where we might send these kids. Like, have another conceptual idea of several other schools, so we know even more information of what we're actually dealing with to help us make, to further along what we're going to do with the 75 kids. I just keep going back to that question. I keep going, yeah, but we don't really know what the other schools are going to look like or what they're actually conceptually willing to do for us. And I would feel better starting to build what we're going to do with those 75 kids if I knew what schools and what they'd be willing to come to the table with conceptually. That's just the question that keeps going over in my head as I'm listening to all the discussion and trying to figure out what are we going to do with the 75. I just really feel like we need to know first which other schools and what they would be willing to discuss with us.
I have a question for the board. Typically, about this time, we take a break, but we have stayed in this discussion, and I'm wondering if, at the will of the board, that we take a brief break right now, because we need to go look at a motion and how to reconsider it, and I need a few minutes to be able to do that.
Okay.
If that's okay. Is that all right with the rest of the board? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. Dr. Littlefield?
I have a recommendation for the board. Actually, I have two recommendations for the board. One is that you reconsider the multi-district approach. And I think, you know, the way to do that, I think the last time that it was voted on, it failed 3-2. So a person that was on the prevailing side, one of the three, would make a motion to reconsider the multi-district approach. And then, assuming that it's seconded and it passes, then in fact, you can start talking about the multi-district approach. The second part of my recommendation to you is that you focus in on Bow and Pembroke Academy, in addition to Pinkerton and Manchester. So we'll be actually dealing with 4. Pembroke Academy and Bow.
Leanne, I have a question for you.
But I think the motion for reconsideration needs to occur first.
I just had a question, and was there a reason you left Londonderry out there?
No, other than the fact that I think the same concerns I would have about distance For Derry, I would have with Londonderry. But no, there was not a specific reason, and maybe it becomes 3. I'm thinking of the kids, it's the transportation that I'm really concerned about. And I'm thinking of our kids in the furthest parts of Hooksett. Pembroke and Bow become possibly more convenient for them. And Londonderry becomes a trip. And I know the board is going to have to, at some point in time, as this conversation, great conversation goes on, you're going to have to tackle transportation. And I don't know how you're going to do it, and I don't want to put too many things on the table all at once, but it would be really tough to throw Londonderry in the mix and transport our kids. But no particular reason why I'd leave it off, and if it were 3 rather than 2. Excuse me, it would be 3 rather than 2.
I have a question that is procedural. So a motion to reconsider the multi-contract option needs to be brought back by someone who voted in the affirmative or in the negative?
In the majority.
In the majority.
That's a better way.
And does the person need to cite where the original motion was?
No.
Oh, well, then I just spent the whole break looking for where it was for nothing. Okay, I was just wondering, because it's in the June 18th meeting minutes. Thank
The
you.
purpose being the motion fails, obviously.
It has to be someone in the
person who fails will
affirmative.
keep bringing it up just
Okay.
because they want to change it.
Okay.
The most recent was the 19th, right, the special meeting.
On August 19th?
Yeah, we voted not to pursue multi-contract plan on August 19th. Remember, that's what we called that meeting to discuss multiple, that's when we had the easels out and all of that. And at near the end of that meeting, the motion was to pursue, and it failed.
I'd like to make a motion that we reconsider the multi-district concept that was voted down on August 19th.
I'll second.
Does anyone have any questions or discussion?
I think we've already spoken to the motion prior, so I'm good.
Anyone second?
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Littlefield, I have a question while Cheryl is processing, if that's okay. Can this board, well, we can, but would it be okay if we have you pursue Pinkerton into contract negotiations? Have you looked to the other 2 or 3 schools to do a multi-contract, and this board have 2 weeks to look, to think about, to communicate with the public, the lottery, criteria for going someplace else? Do we have to make that 3rd decision this evening? If, I mean, we have people and
Yes.
we have to make that decision. Okay.
I'm pushing you.
Yes, I know.
I'm pushing
But I'm just
you
saying, everyone who's
because
here has shared with the board what their feelings, thoughts are in the break, or may have attempted to. I mean, certainly some people came and shared it with me while I was looking through minutes. But this is only a cross-section of people. This isn't, I just was wondering if we could get more public.
And you haven't voted on, can I?
Yeah.
You haven't voted on a Pinkerton contract, you haven't voted on any of the other contract. I'm pushing you because I want you to say, we're going to reconsider it, and then I'm going to defer to Leanne. After the reconsideration, do they have to vote to pursue a so there's 2 motions.
They're just bringing it back on the table.
So there's going to be 2 votes. And if you decide that it's going to be Pembroke, Bow, and Londonderry, or Pembroke and Bow, that I'm getting on the phone tomorrow, and I'll be sitting down with those people next week, so that I might be able to report back to you at your next meeting conceptually what they may be willing to do or not willing to do. And then that may weigh on your final decision to really go, you know, and develop contract language and so forth.
I think procedurally we should have this vote, because I appreciate the information, but we're already starting to reconsider something that is not on the table.
Exactly.
And
You're
mine
really
is-
reconsidering, so you can have this discussion, they're already happening.
And my comment is specific to the reconsideration. Just because I do have my reservations about reconsideration, only because I'm stuck on the semantics of it, unfortunately. Multi-contract to me implies a lot more liberality, a lot more availability and flexibility. And I just don't want to get that mixed up, or for parents to get that confused, that there is some limitations here. So I do really have my reservations on that. However, I'm not one to just stand alone on that semantics, but I did feel that I needed to voice that concern. So I am going to support this reconsideration. I just do think that it does kind of matter, the semantics of how we are presenting this to the community. And that's all that I really want to say. I just wanted the public to understand where I stand on it, although I will support it so that we can move forward for the students.
Is there any other discussion? With there being none, I will call this vote to reconsider, for reconsideration of the motion on a multi-school contract. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries 5-0.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we pursue a multi-school contract plan.
I'll second it.
They don't have much in the schools. You don't want to mess with the schools again?
No. I'll speak to my motion. I think the language of pursuing a plan means that we're going to send Dr. Littlefield out there to see what's there. I'm not really for limiting it at this point, because I've said this before with multi-school contract. If there's no downside and someone's willing to guarantee us a rate and guarantee us that they'll take so many kids and there's no downside for us, I don't think that we have a problem talking to them. Transportation, we haven't even gotten to yet, but we could certainly have multiple contracts without multiple transportation. And that's a decision this board's going to have to make. And I think when we start looking at the numbers, you know, it's going to be an interesting discussion. So I think we should, at this point, pursue it and see what's available. And I would just use a case in point. You know, on the 19th, yeah, we had a circle up there with 25 or 30, and we're looking at 75 to 45. So we make guesses here about what schools are going to say, but until you go and you talk to them, we don't know. So I think this plan is to go and talk to them and see what we can get, and then come back.
Shall we move on?
Just back to my point before, the only reason why, and I'm not solidified in my decision whether I will support it or not, but again, I do think that saying that we're pursuing a multi-contract, I guess in my own opinion, it is not really where I thought or saw where we were going. I feel like we're addressing some flexibility for parents and some distance issues, more than that we're pursuing a multi-contract. So I guess I do need to, I'll listen to whatever anybody else decides on the board. But I do have my reservations about calling it a multi-contract. I think that it's important that we ask Dr. Littlefield to come back with some numbers and some actual conceptual ideas from these other schools, and at that point we can decide whether we are going to pursue, if at that point we want to call it multi-contract, I'd be comfortable calling it that then, or if we're going to call it something different. I would prefer that we not support this and support Dr. Littlefield moving forward with conceptually getting ideas from us what this is going to look like.
Actually, so how does Steve first? Then David.
So, again, I have similar reservations to Cheryl. The couple of things, and again, this is what you get with Anchor School and some other schools tied to that, I guess, plan. Something that you're not going to get, that we're getting from Pinkerton is representation on the board, which again, everybody, that was a big deal last year when all the stuff hit the fan with Manchester. So again, if a concept is going to include that, I'm in favor of it. The other part, like David was speaking about, that is going to cause us a lot of difficulty and angst and tough decisions. And actually, we got an email this week from one of the constituents that had put a bunch of questions together, that are questions that we're going to need to answer in addition to these are, again, what do we do with tuition? What do we do with transportation? So again, there's going to be hard decisions that are going to need to be made. I mean, I listed like 9 or 10 things that were items that would cause difficulty and angst in a multi-contract, and those are still out there. But if I get the ones that I think are important and the other ones that can be managed, I'm okay.
Well, I think that we need to look at this, that if you're supporting this idea of Pinkerton with the, say, 75 to 45 out, or that could even change, and you support this, then we're left with what to do with those other kids. And in the past, one of the most frustrating things on this board about JCB was that as board members, we could not encourage, help, do anything other than either assign or not assign kids. And when we heard the tuition differential stories and how that was unfair. So I think as a board, we need to attempt to make the best deal we can for those 75 potential kids that are going to go somewhere else. And if we can step in and guarantee a tuition rate that's paid by this district, that takes away one of those things that's going to hamper those kids. If we could have a guarantee that they're going to accept, not based on academics or any other thing, that's another thing that's taken out of the way. So we're providing more value for the students. And if there's not a downside on that, if we're not paying extra or committing students, then I think if we don't do that for the parents, we're doing a disservice, because we're forcing those parents to go out there and look at what the tuition is at this other place and how do I get in and all this kind of stuff. And before, under our contract with Manchester, we were bound, we couldn't do it. Now's our opportunity to do it, and I think that we should pursue it. And frankly, we could call it whatever we want. It is potentially signing multiple contracts with multiple school districts. So I think, we need to describe it as clearly as we can, but I think we certainly should pursue it.
Yeah, I just want to share a few comments from some of the folks that were here tonight. The big concern they have is we, Hooksett, just spent quite a bit of money legally getting out of our Manchester contract. And our Manchester contract was fairly restrictive, was their, the Manchester impression of that contract. And the concern is that we're now about to get into another restrictive contract with Pinkerton. And I just wondered if we could go through a trial period with Pinkerton where we don't have any restrictive numbers. So they basically would take as many kids as we said were coming each year. And I'm asking that of Dr. Little.
We can't discuss the Pinkerton contract right now because we have a motion on the floor that we have to speak to that motion.
Okay.
That would be a discussion for after this motion is voted on. Is there any more discussion on this motion?
May I? I guess, because I don't think that it's not only, the only option we have is to have contracts with these other schools. I mean, there are other possibilities that would include a policy similar to JCD, setting a tuition and doing memos and memorandums. So to me, we still need to consider all of that because we don't know what those other schools are going to come back and say what they're willing to do. That may change how we decide to handle these other students. So that's also as we're going through this and discussing it, these are the questions that just keep coming up in my head, and why, unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to support this motion.
Well, Cheryl, just in in good debate here, I guess I would ask if we can guarantee a rate that is the same as this contract or any other contract, we can guarantee availability and acceptance, and we're paying nothing extra. Why wouldn't we want to accept that agreement? Just like if we went to the store and they guaranteed that we could buy something at a certain price, but we weren't under contract to buy it. Well, that gives us that option, and it gives our parents that option to not have a different tuition, not have those acceptance problems. So I guess what I'm looking for is what's the downside of having these contracts if they come the way we want them?
And if they come to us and say that, David, I think then we definitely would go with that. That makes the most logical sense. But we don't know at this juncture whether they will or they won't. And that's why I can't support it. I say, let's get the information first, then decide whether we're going to pursue this multi-contract district. That's my point. I'm not saying that I'm against it. I'm saying I don't see how we can mold it into a multi-contract when we really don't know what the other schools are going to provide. What I'm saying is, let's make the motion to have Dr. Littlefield come back to us with the same kind of idea that he came back to us with Pinkerton, and that's what the conceptual idea is. So then we actually know what the eggs in the basket are, and then we can form that motion that it will look like on the March ballot. That's more of my point.
Well, Cheryl, I think that's where we are, because my motion is to pursue a multi-contract plan. So just like tonight, when we're looking at this Pinkerton plan, we can talk about positives and negatives, but we're going to come to a point where this board votes on this. So pursuing and having Dr. Littlefield go out and look at the multi-contract situation, it doesn't mean that if you vote to have him pursue it, that you or I or anybody has to vote for what he comes back with. But my point is, I was frankly surprised when he said the 75 number from Pinkerton, because we talked on the 19th about traditionally Pinkerton being down there at 25, maybe 30. So you gotta say, whether you like these numbers or not, even the bottom number is higher than what we anticipated. So I think by asking the question, it gives them the chance to give us a real answer and not us basing it on what we think. So, this is going to certainly leave everybody open to not support it later. I mean, we're not voting to enter into a multi-contract.
I have similar reservations to that Cheryl and Phil have discussed. Not that I don't want to know, but I don't want to say yes to a multi-contract if it's not I'm just very unsure at this moment. And I, off the motion, do have a question. And I've asked Leanne to review the motion.
The motion was to pursue a multi-district contract plan.
Is there any discussion?
I'll speak to it again. I can say for Cheryl and Tricia, I understand you have apprehension. And if Dr. Littlefield's bringing us back to facts, then we'll be talking about those concerns based on the facts. And right now, it's kind of speculation. And nothing closes the door to not enter into multi-contracts. And I'd say furthermore, we're an educational body, an institution, and the main thing to do is to get the facts. Dr. Littlefield spoke to it last week, about, last meeting about not dealing with misinformation. We're getting to the actual facts so that when we're talking about something, we're talking about that. And I think this is our opportunity to do it. I think the public wants us to do that, and I think we should move ahead. Thank you.
Is there any more discussion? All those in favor of pursuing a multi-contract, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed?
Aye. Aye.
Were you and I?
Yes, I'm an aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. I'd like to make a motion for Dr. Littlefield to pursue, proceed with discussions with Pinkerton from discussions to contract negotiations. I'll speak to my motion when I would like to make a motion to have Dr. Littlefield proceed from discussions with Pinkerton Academy to contract negotiations.
I still didn't, for some reason I still didn't get it.
All right.
Motion to.
Proceed from discussions with Pinkerton Academy to contract,
Discussions.
from discussions to contract negotiations. I'll speak to my motion when I receive a second.
Second.
It is not that I am opposed to looking at other schools, but I think looking at a multi-contract with other schools once we have a secured anchor school where all of our students have a place to go. If you look at multi-contract, there are not enough spaces for every student to have a home, and I think that's very important. I'm not diminishing the fact that people living on the west side of the river have a problem, have transportation issues, people in North Hooksett, people might want their child to go to a smaller school. But I really think we have to have a home for everyone before we begin to look at the students that feel Pinkerton is not the right choice for their students. And that's why I made this motion. Yes, Mr. Pearl.
I think one of the biggest confusions on this board is ever that it's been one or the other. We certainly can always be looking at parallel, and tonight, multi-contract came up under the report we got about Pinkerton and there being some reason there to pursue this and to pursue multi-contract because there's some perceivable space there in those numbers. So, yeah, sure, I think we should certainly be negotiating with Pinkerton, and we should be figuring out if these numbers came true, what we would be doing with those children that wanted to go somewhere else.
Is there any more discussion on this? There being no discussion, I will, absolutely.
Just for clarification, a lot of good ideas being thrown around. My sense is that I'm picking up the will of the board would be to pursue that conceptual agreement with Pinkerton that I reported to you on.
Correct.
And that when you're talking about multi-district, you're talking about that cadre of students not included in what I presented to you conceptually. Do I hear that right?
Yes.
My feelings.
Well, and I would just comment, I think we need to look at all the scenarios too. So we could have a scenario where you negotiate the numbers of students at multiple schools, and those contracts could pass, and the Pinkerton contract could fail. So at this point, we haven't talked about tying those two together, although the space that we're talking about is made from the Pinkerton decision. But I think, as I said before, looking at worst case scenarios, I think we should talk about that. Because isn't that a possibility that we would have to put up the Pinkerton contract on the ballot, and would we have to put up these mini or multiple, and they stand alone? Or
You know what, I honestly don't know. I think that given conceptually what I'm talking to you about tonight, that the Pinkerton contract would have to go on the ballot. Because we would be agreeing to, or they would be agreeing to accept all our students if need be. Therefore, the board would need the authority to assign all of the students, and I think that would have to pass muster of the voters. If we're talking about these smaller agreements where we're not really assigning kids, people are choosing it, I'm not sure whether we need a full-fledged tuition agreement or whether we can enter into a memorandum of understanding with multiple districts. I really just don't know the answer to that question.
And I guess I would be one that would be part of your pursuit, because we need to find out
Yes.
what the possible
Yeah.
scenarios are
Yeah.
with the voters, because
Yeah.
we don't know how that's
Yeah.
going to go. But, you know, and then my understanding would be, I believe, that if you enter into actual negotiations with them, then we could go into non-public and discuss specific points about the negotiations at that point.
Yes.
And we wouldn't have to,
Yes.
like here in public, in such a.
Oh, because sometimes it compromises your
Right,
position.
but right now, we are not at that point
No.
because you have not entered into
Right.
negotiations for a contract. So that's another plus about moving to the
Right.
next stage, that we can discuss it privately.
But I guess what I was trying to really make sure I understand, am I going to be authorized by the board with the Pinkerton thing to start doing language rather than concept? And have you meet their board of directors and follow through on that? We're doing that plus.
Yes,
Yes.
We're expanding. Okay.
it's my understanding.
Correct.
Okay, no, I understand. Yeah. Just let me know,
So what's
what you want me to do.
Is there any more discussion on pursuing, going into contract negotiations with Pinkerton? Yes, John?
I'm just going to, I'm going to share, you know, my reservations with this. It's really, again, based upon the fact that we just got out of a contract that was limiting, and we're now talking about getting into another contract that's going to be limiting us. I can't support it, and that's the reason why. I think we're at a great negotiation position right now as far as Hooksett, and I think we're going to give that up if we set limitations on the kids that are allowed choice.
Well, John, I would say I share a lot of those reservations, but I also, like I told the other board members, we can vote no for this at the end, but I think it is our due diligence to make the best deal that we can, and then decide if that deal is good enough as a board or as individual members that we want to support it, and then ultimately the voters will decide that same decision. So, you know, again, I don't, other than Dr. Littlefield's time in negotiating, I don't think there's a downside in moving into the negotiation, because of course, it's going to be the end result that we vote on. So I think that in that sense, I can support it. There's some things that I'd like to see a little different about it, but I'll reserve those comments for a legal non-public session.
Yes, John?
You know, David, I think that's a fair statement, and you're right. I mean, I do want to see what's going to come out of this, and the only way we're going to do that is allow Dr. Littlefield the permission, if you will, to move forward. And as we were kind of surprised tonight with these numbers, maybe there'll be something else that'll come out during the negotiations. He's heard my concerns. I'm getting that from the public. So if we can relay that to the folks at Pinkerton, I'd be more than happy. So I'll support this moving forward.
Is there any more discussion, or can I call this to a vote? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0.